Have you ever felt like you don't belong, or perhaps that all of your achievements are based on luck? Or maybe you feel like you're one step away from being exposed as a fraud. If so, you're not alone. And that feeling has a name: Impostor Syndrome. And today we're going to break it down so you can break free from this phenomenon. Hi, my name is John Ryan. I'm a Master Trainer and Coach, and I want to help you identify and overcome Impostor Syndrome based on my nearly 3 decades of experience in working with high performers. But first, let's take a look at what exactly is Impostor Syndrome. According to the Oxford Dictionary, Impostor Syndrome is the persistent inability to believe that one's success is deserved or has been legitimately achieved as a result of one's own efforts or skills. And this is a big problem. One review of 62 studies involving over 14,000 participants found that up to 82% of people had Impostor Syndrome. And as you can imagine, this is one of the most common challenges I see with my clients. And it doesn't really matter where you are on the career path, whether you're starting out as an entrepreneur, a coach, you're an executive, or you're on the path to becoming a billionaire. And oddly enough, for many high performers, they feel that this anxiety is part of their superpower and that their own unending inadequacy is what actually drives their performance. And no matter what they do, it's never good enough because you can always do better, or so the thinking goes. Some of my clients have shared with me that they never hit their goals. I remember working with one person, incredible leader, incredible human being, super successful, and he shared with me that over the last 20 years, he had never actually hit a goal that he set. And he was at first quite proud of this and credited it to his incredibly high standards. However, a week later, he comes back and he says, after some reflection, I have to admit that I really hate that I never hit my goals. And it left him feeling like a failure and that he was, in fact, not good enough. In other words, he was an imposter. And what he really felt was anxiety, stress, and disappointment. So how do you know if you're experiencing imposter syndrome? I want to share with you 4 things to watch out for. Number 1 is attributing success to luck or timing. And this is more than just sharing the win and saying, oh, I got lucky, or it was a team effort, everyone. This is really where you can't acknowledge the win, which relates to number 2, which is where you have difficulty internalizing accomplishments. You know you were successful. You can acknowledge mentally the success that you have, but unfortunately, you're not feeling it. And oftentimes that comes from number 3, which is where you have a fear of being exposed as a fraud. So we don't want to acknowledge the wins because it sounds like we're bragging. And if we do, people are going to look at us more closely and they're going to look under the hood and they're going to realize that I'm not really qualified. And to counter that, what we do is number 4, which is perfectionism. We work really hard. In fact, we overwork to make sure that we're not found out. And after all, if we do things perfectly, then people won't know that we're really just faking it. And the impact of that is that we feel stress, anxiety, burnout, we feel exhausted, and we avoid putting ourselves out there and taking risks. And because of that, we don't really maximize our achievement and we miss out on a ton of fulfillment in life. Now that we know what to look out for, where does imposter syndrome even come from? Well, there's lots of factors that go into the development of imposter syndrome, but the 2 that really stand out to me in my experience is comparison and lack of self-acceptance. And those 2 are intimately connected. Think back to your childhood for a moment. And if you didn't have a childhood, think about someone else's childhood, perhaps that of a 2-year-old. And chances are, even though they're still figuring out life, the whole walking and talking thing and all the things that we have to learn, chances are they're happy. They accept and love themselves unconditionally. And why? Well, in part, there's no comparison. They're not looking at other kids, and they have self-acceptance that is absolutely unconditional. Their worth is not dependent on what they have. It's not dependent on what they can do. It is inherent in who they are. But at some point in our development, we start to compare ourselves to others around us. We look around us at school, in our neighborhood, and we say, hey, this person is this. Why can't I be that way? Why can't I do it the way they do it? Why can't I have what they have? And we start to assign meaning to that difference as being less than. So what that means for us then is imposter syndrome is not something that we inherited through our DNA, but it's something that we actually learn from our environment. So what do we do about it? Outside of doing a full breakthrough session to help you let go of limiting emotions, limiting beliefs, and behavior patterns, I want to share with you 5 practice tips to help you begin to let go of comparisons and accept yourself unconditionally. Number 1 one is acknowledge wins. Now, if you're a high achiever, you probably know what I'm talking about. Most people I work with who fall in that category find themselves working for years to accomplish something. And once they do, within an hour or two, they say to themselves, what's next? They pick the different mountain and they start focusing on that and they dive back into work. But they're missing an important part of life, which is celebrating the big wins and really enjoying the process along the way. This doesn't mean it has to be going on a vacation, buying a new car, or even doing a fancy dinner, but instead must be something that acknowledges the energy and the contribution that you put in as well as the people around you. So acknowledge success. And I always recommend people to design what is your success ritual that you can celebrate the people in your life that have helped you get to this point. In addition to acknowledging the wins, you also want to do number 2, which is acknowledge the feelings. Now, this is easier said than done, especially for high performers, because when those feelings of anxiety, stress, and feeling less than come up, we tend, rather than to look inward, the tendency is to look outward. We pick goals off in the distance that are huge and meaningful, going to take a lot of time and energy to avoid looking inward. So resist that temptation. Take a moment, journal, write down what is the name of the feeling or feelings that you're having at that moment, and then you're ready for number 3, which is to work through those feelings. And to work through the feelings, what we're first doing is what you already did, which is identify what the feeling is, and then look a little bit closer. Where did this come from? And then ask yourself, is this true? And most of the times it's not true, the assumption that we're making there. And then if that's not true, what is true? As an example of this, let's imagine that I have a speaking engagement coming up and I'm feeling some anxiety. Well, first thing we're gonna do once we've labeled it is to dig a little deeper. Where is this coming from? Well, maybe I have an underlying fear that maybe I'm not gonna do a good job. And if I don't do a good job, then I'll be embarrassed as I misspeak and mess up the presentation. Well, then I look at it, is this true? Well, no, I probably won't be embarrassed because why? What is true? Well, if I've done the best that I can to prepare for the presentation, then that's really all I can do. So we're working through the fear, the anxiety to find the underlying truth that keeps us on the path towards where we want to go. And the fourth one is to identify what is good enough. Many times when we're experiencing imposter syndrome, it comes from comparison. And if we're not sure really what the standard is or what we're comparing ourselves to, then of course we're setting ourselves up for failure. To help us understand where that line is about what's good enough and what's not good enough, we might want to look at the control, influence, concern model, where we have a circle of control in the middle. And these are all the things that we have absolute control over: my thoughts, my feelings, and behaviors. And that's pretty much where that ends. Then we have the circle of influence, which are the people and systems around us that we can influence by what we say and what we do. On the outer circle, we have the circle of concern, which are all the things that we are concerned about but can do nothing about. And as you can imagine, if we're focusing on the circle of concern, which are all the things that we have no control nor influence over, then we are absolutely setting ourselves up to fail. So the key here is to simply ask ourselves, okay, what can I control? What can I influence? And how can I expand my influence? If I'm doing that, that's all I can do. That's the line. That's how you know you're doing everything you possibly can. And it has to be good enough because you can't do more than what you actually can do. So that's number 4, which is focusing on what you can control and influence and nothing else. So let's review the first 4 before we move on to number 5, which may be the most important of them all. Number 1, acknowledge wins. Number 2, acknowledge the feelings. Number 3, work through the feelings. And number 4, focus on the inner circle. And number 5 is develop a positive self-image. And the way we're going to do that is to practice. That's what we're going to do right now. If you would, go ahead and close your eyes. And I want you to create a mental movie where you visualize yourself. And just notice, how do you visualize yourself? How do you see yourself? How do you get a sense of who you are? Is it a positive self-image or negative? How do you see yourself? Let's take you out throughout your day. How do you see yourself going through the day? How do you do? Do you automatically create wins? Do you have losses? Are you crushing it or are you struggling? All right, come back in the room. And if you saw anything other than absolute excellence and you being your best version of yourself, you might have some issues with your self-image. And one way to combat that is by practicing seeing yourself as the best version of who you can be on a daily basis. This was first popularized in the classic book Psycho-Cybernetics by Dr. Maxwell Maltz in 1960. So it's been around for quite a long time, and it takes practice, it takes work, but as you do it, your performance begins to improve because your image of who you are begins to shape up. It's the concept of be, do, have. If you want to have something in life, well, of course you have to do things, but if you want to do the things you need to do to get what you want to have, then you have to be the best version of yourself in order to make that happen. So to review the 5 that we talked about here to help you combat imposter syndrome and get rid of it once and for all is: number 1, acknowledge the wins. Number 2, acknowledge the feelings. Number 3, work through the feelings. Number 4, focus on the inner circle of what you can control and influence. And number 5, develop that positive self-image. And if you're not opposed to it, hit subscribe to stay connected and ring the notification bell to join the conversation. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, develop yourself, empower others, and lead by example.